Good morning and welcome to this reflection from Christchurch on a day when, again, the news is totally dominated by the events in Ukraine, and it's very hard to know quite how we should be praying, how should we be reacting when we have a God who promises peace, and now we have blatant warmongering going on. I turned to Micah, the prophecy of the prophet Micah, written 700 years before the birth of Christ, to help me come to terms with some of it, with verses that we know well, but are good to remind ourselves of, which I find helpful. Just picking out verses from chapter 4 and 5 of Micah. In the last days, many nations will come and say, "Let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between many peoples, and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." And then 2 verses from the next chapter. This is one of those prophecies that leads very specifically to the birth of Jesus and to his role as Saviour. "Out of Bethlehem will come one who will be ruler over Israel. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord, his God. And they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be our peace." Well, however much we try, we can't get away from the dreadful news of Russia's war in Ukraine. Civilians and soldiers are dying. More than 1.5 million people have already left their homeland as refugees. And Micah was speaking in Israel, then a divided nation, under attack by powerful nations. And it's in that context that God speaks through Micah to give the people then, the beleaguered people then, and us now, a promise of a time when there will be no war and where God will be our peace. They didn't see much peace in their time. And despite God's promise of peace, nor do we in ours, even all these years later. The First World War was called the war to end all wars, but it didn't live up to its title. In fact, there have been very few days even since then when there has not been active conflict somewhere in the world. We're all absolutely horrified by what's going on in Ukraine, and it's very tempting to question the reliability of God's promises. Through Micah, God promised that he will settle disputes for strong nations. People will turn their weapons into useful tools, swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. And he promised to be our peace. When on earth will that come about? We might ask. When will that come about on earth? To answer the question, Micah says it'll be in the last days. Other parts of the Bible, they talk of the day of judgment or the day of the Lord, which is all the same thing as the second coming of Jesus, the expression we tend to use more today. And of course, as Jesus himself said, no one knows when that will be. As Christians have done for more than 2,500 years, we have to wait patiently, living in hope and living as if Jesus might come back this afternoon, and at the same time as if he might not come for years to come. Is that much consolation to the people of Ukraine or Myanmar or Yemen or anywhere else where there's no peace? Where today tools are being used as weapons rather than the other way round. In all those places, and for that matter here in our own country, where we see violence, dishonesty, greed, and all the rest, Where is the peace promised by God? My first comment is that wars and rumours of wars, to use the expression that Jesus used when he said we're to expect before the day of the Lord when he comes again, wars and rumours of wars should not make us lose confidence in God and his word. Things are certainly bad, but they are no worse than previous generations have suffered and feared. His promises of peace for the future have not changed, and the promises of God's presence and strength with us now have not changed. And countless people, including me, would acknowledge God's active love day by day. We must certainly not, and we couldn't, disregard what's going on in Ukraine. But nor should we somehow let it dominate our every thought. Perhaps even we should limit the amount of news we watch. We should not let fear overcome us. But practically speaking, we should be praying for peace, for those directly and indirectly involved, for the bereaved, for refugees, for local leaders, for the world's leaders, for church leaders and church people as they seek to assist the displaced and the bereaved. We should consider making financial donations, whether it's to Tear Fund or the Disasters Emergency Committee or to the church in Moldova where Christ Church has a connection and where they're already helping the displaced. This is the verse from Matthew that Jesus said, "You will hear of wars and rumours of wars, but do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes. The love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved." The one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Finally, going back to the prophet Micah, let me read just one verse from the final chapter, chapter 6 and verse 8. It's a well-known verse. "God has shown you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you, your God." That was written in a time of war and of real anxiety about the future. So while continuing our concern for Ukraine, Jesus calls us to stand firm in our Christian beliefs. Despite whatever happens in the world, and as we stand firm, we are to do so in justice, showing constant love, and living close to God. Now you'll find a link to that great hymn, "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come."